in the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and the Spirit who is our companion. Amen. The feeding of the multitude. Do you know that this familiar story appears not only in 4 Gospels, but twice in the Gospel of Matthew? The authors of the Gospels must have felt that it was an extremely important story, one that has a lot to tell us about God. It may have even more to tell us about ourselves. In the passage just before this one, Jesus has learned about the death of his cousin, John the Baptizer. Jesus must be exhausted, not only with grief for his cousin, but from the never-ending stream of people seeking help. And Jesus never refuses anyone who asks for his help. So Jesus and his disciples head for a place apart in the wilderness, a place where they can rest and pray and find spiritual healing for themselves. But that isn't meant to be. It turns out that people from the surrounding villages have been tracking Jesus's movements. They're not going to miss out on a chance to see Jesus and receive his blessing. So here they are, over 5,000 men, women, and children. Jesus continues his ministry of teaching and healing, but it's getting dark. And his disciples are concerned for the people. They suggest that the crowd goes home to their villages and have their evening meals there. Jesus has deep compassion for these people, those so in need of hope and healing. But Jesus doesn't think it's necessary to send them away just yet. So Jesus tells his disciples, "You feed them." They object that 5 loaves and 2 fish are hardly sufficient for such a large crowd. Jesus ignores their complaint and asks that the food be brought to him. And in Eucharistic fashion, Jesus looks up to heaven, blesses and breaks the bread, and gives the food for the disciples to distribute. Surprise! Despite such a large crowd, there will be 12 baskets left over and abundance. In this event, Jesus is not trying to show that he's some kind of magician with special powers. The real message is what can happen when we act in justice, mercy, and love. Like the disciples, it's easy to diminish or deny the power we have to do good. We may feel exhausted or distracted by other demands placed upon us. And this is an exhausting time. We're exhausted by uncertainty about many things. How do we survive this pandemic? How do we engage with a larger community while we're huddled at home? What ways can we reach out to the hungry or people experiencing homelessness? On top of all this is the looming issue of global climate change. Like the disciples, we may doubt we have the resources or even the will to stay connected and involved. But now as then, Jesus is saying to us, you give them something to eat. No excuses, no way out. But the disciples didn't feed thousands of people by themselves. They trusted Jesus and all he had shown them. They trusted Jesus even as they were passing around what they thought were empty baskets that unexpectedly became filled. I think we can count on Jesus's presence too. It's never more essential than where we're feeling doubtful or depleted. We have it in us to feed the hungry, to heal the sick with compassion, to tend others' needs with our loving attention. This week, we have been moved so deeply by the ceremonies around the death of Representative John Robert Lewis, a great American. I was deeply impressed by the message he asked the New York Times to publish on the day of his funeral. We have been focused on John Lewis's unfaltering witness to basic rights for all people. But in these final words, John Lewis is calling us to action, almost as if he were telling us, like Jesus, you feed them. John Lewis writes so eloquently, though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, he writes, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Now, John Lewis was speaking primarily, I believe, to younger generations of all ethnicities gathered to protest brutality. But I don't think he counts anyone out. So what can we do? Charlie's Place remains a focal point of St. Margaret's ministries and mission. We may move on to add and imagine and bring in other ways of reaching out. We may find new ways to support and uphold people who, through no fault of their own, find themselves in desperate straits. We think also of people threatened with eviction, which is a very current crisis. People who are hungry, people who can't imagine ever having a satisfying and fulfilling life again. And for those who are grieving, we need to offer love. Many of these desperate people are unknown to us. For them, there are feeding programs and other support agencies we can sustain with our financial commitment. But others may be people we actually know, too shy or embarrassed to tell us just how lonely and afraid they are. We may feel inadequate to offer our concern and love, to give out of our own sometimes depleted resources. Listening with compassion to a friend when we ourselves are exhausted or afraid. Even so, Jesus persists. You give them something to eat. Jesus calls us to just start bringing the basket around, even when it doesn't seem to hold very much. Like the first disciples, we may be surprised, even shocked, by what our efforts can accomplish. We may not feel that we have that much to offer, but we may be surprised when our nothing much becomes not only enough, but an abundance. Amen.